Most of the times people say, what? WWF works in cities? So I thought I'd share with you briefly what we do before handing over to this fantastic panel. So yes, we are a conservation organization first and foremost. We love pandas, we love tigers, we love elephants, and much more. And we love people. This is a very important part of it. And this is some of the data that has been very scary for us. We've been watching these trends, I think, for more than 40, 50 years. And this is the most recent Living Planet Index. And what you can read there, the population sizes of mammals, birds, fish, amphibians, and reptiles have seen an alarming drop of almost 70% since 1970. We will be coming out with the next Living Planet report this September, and it probably will be even scarier than this. So this is why we work in cities. I'm not going to read this slide. You know it all. This is our mantra as well as yours. And I just wanted to share with you a few of the areas that we are working in cities and just kind of jump through these pretty quick. So our flagship program is called the One Planet City Challenge. This we've been running for over 10 years. We've worked in almost 900 cities. It runs every other year. So this most recent challenge, we had 360 cities join us, and we're very excited about this. We've also been doing a lot of feedback to the cities to make sure that this is of value to them, because we're asking them to do their data reporting. We've talked a lot about data, and we want to make sure that they get some impact out of this as well. So our cities are located all around the world. These are some of the countries where those cities are located. I didn't put individual dots here, but I thought I might get a bit busy. And it runs in a 2-year cycle, so we work often very closely with the cities on doing their climate data reporting. We talk about alignment a lot. So we use the CDP Equitable reporting platform. We ask cities to report on what the Global Covenant of Mayors asks them, because we don't want them to have to report and report and report. So we want to make sure that this has an added value. Then we evaluate them and we provide feedback, specifically on how closely they're aligned to the Paris Agreement. And then we celebrate them. We have a jury process. We acknowledge our strongest cities at the national and global level, and we do a lot on public engagement. So this is a little bit of what we've been doing in the last few years. I'll flip through this pretty quick. I just wanted to also pitch some of the work we've been doing with partners, in particular on the Science-Based Targets Network, both the work stream on 1.5 degree alignment, and also we have Jennifer Ray in the room. She's also the one that is sending the late night messages. That is not me. So we've been working on the nature indicators together. So this is a little bit what's the value for cities? Yes, we acknowledge them. We provide individual feedback to show how closely cities are attuned to those Paris Agreement targets. We lift them in different forum. At the bottom is our celebration with Ban Ki-moon at the Habitat 3 dinner in Quito. And we are talking with some of Michal's colleagues about perhaps doing this at the World Urban Forum. And then we love, because love is so central to this conversation. So we want to ensure that people have identity and ownership, and that they want to be part of the solution. So we have a public engagement campaign called We Love Cities. I'll share with these numbers. I'm not going to read through them for you now, but it's both an online and an offline campaign. We use social media, but we also do activities like beach cleanups, park planning, et cetera, with citizens and mayors together. I'm going to jump through this pretty quick because we've talked a lot about nature, and we're going to talk about it a little bit further on. And I have such a fantastic panel. So I just wanted to pitch a few of the areas where we're working in collaboration, including with the Biodiverse Cities 2030 report. This is a great report. If you haven't seen it, definitely do. Yes, Jennifer, if you want to know more about this, she will definitely raise her hand and share with it afterwards. And finally, just 2 things that I wanted to add that I think we can provide to this incredibly fantastic group of people. We've been working a lot on behavior change and how we can support cities and local governments on really harnessing that behavior change, engaging their citizens. So we do have this guide. It is online. And also how cities can take that step to work on public engagement. And with that, I will say thank you, and I will go over to the panel. So Hele, I was able to use this, so I usually have problems, but this time I didn't. This is my last slide, so I don't know. I'm going to talk to our fantastic team here. And now I will introduce my wonderful panel. Well, they've already been introduced. So what I will say is, can you please provide a short intervention on the topic of today's panel? How will you define inclusive resilience based on your perspectives, experiences, and backgrounds? And I know we have a few slides coming up, and I think I will start actually with Sheela.
So I think inclusion is
maybe
overused.
A little closer.
Inclusion is the overused word which doesn't do much. It's quite empty because we find it very convenient to accommodate people who we are comfortable with, but it leads to huge exclusions. So I say that the real challenge is to define and identify how populations get excluded and what you need to do for that, because the concept of resilience itself is an extremely local, personal, and yet collective process. And exclusions just further remove the opportunities for these groups to explore this concept in some ways. And since I represent the world of informality, I would say they are deeply excluded.
Well, we knew you were going to start us off with some good trouble, so thank you for that. We will touch base on that, I'm sure, as we go forward. Did you want to share your slides as well, or?
Well, it all depends on how much time, but I can put this deck into our meeting, but basically to say that I have spent the last 40 years working on these issues, and I don't find a big take-on other than being politically correct. So I get invited to sit on panels where all the big shots sit so I can talk about slum dwellers. And then my community women who are brilliant speakers sometimes get invited to speak too. But we rarely find our agenda, our challenges, our inquiries, and our need to get things done included, funded, supported. So we have decided that we will do exactly what we want, and the present thing that we are doing is setting up a campaign called Roof Over Our Heads, so that the 3 billion people who we anticipate that will come will at least start off with weather-resilient homes that they can produce out of whatever they can access. And our role is to bring in people, emotionally blackmail them, physically abuse them, whatever we can do, to get big businesses to start looking at this group of people as their clients. And we've already started doing R&D with big companies who are facing lots of, they're facing lots of court cases for in Europe and other places for their carbon footprint and things like that. So they do it to save face, but it's very useful for us. So we are going to work in what we call learning labs, which means that community women who volunteer to work with us for 3 years and their neighborhoods become learning labs in which the community themselves, young professionals, people who do their construction, who we now call artisanal contractors, the construction industry, and the people who lend them money, formally or informally. We work together at local levels to find solutions which they can afford. Then we will go after the cities to get them amenities. But first we will make them resilient in their homes. And we plan to do these learning labs in 100 locations in 20 countries in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and MENA. We've already started in India, where we become the crucible for the design and the process. You are going to make my nice PowerPoint. And there's a book there, and I've sent the book to you. It's a brown color cover, which documents the methodology that we have developed. So the idea is to democratize the right to understand what makes you resilient. You know, sitting somewhere in here and talking about resilience has no value for a slum dweller. So what can we do at local levels, and how all these hundreds of local levels can produce new global knowledge that I may share with you next year.
So you've heard it here first. She's coming back. Yes, always a tough act to follow, but we have another strong speaker here talking from a different perspective. Michal, again for you, what does inclusive resilience mean to your fantastic work at UN Habitat and within international institutions?
Thanks very much, Jennifer, and thanks to all of you for fantastic discussions. I'm glad that we are coming as a panel today rather than yesterday already, because the atmosphere is properly charged and enthusiastic. And indeed, let me start on a lighter note, saying that it's good to question the terminology and our own mantras that somehow are created in our minds already. Sometimes, in my previous diplomatic work at the UN in New York, we used to refer to this as UN speak. We are, of course, often obsessed with the UN speak that others do not necessarily understand. So we have to have a bit of a reality check, and I would bring it down to what at UN Habitat we call people-centered. So really not losing the people perspective of everything that we do. That's an important reality check that I think we need on a daily basis. Okay, so of course we can always define of what exactly we mean by that and how we talk about it. You know that in the context of SDGs and the 2030 agenda, we are talking about leaving no one behind. But this is precisely also what inclusive resilience certainly is. At UN Habitat, we are looking at it from a multi-stakeholder, multi-hazard and multi-purpose context, because it's a very complex exercise, as we all know, and of course, reacting to challenges or to hazards indeed needs to be multi-faceted in different contexts. Look at the pandemic, for example. It started as a relatively small health issue. I remember well when initially we thought that it was just going to be a few weeks, that maybe 2 or 3 weeks after that March 13, I will never forget that. My daughters went to school the last day, and then, of course, everything was stopped. And we all know what happened and how things went. But also, what I'm trying to say is that it may have started as a relatively small health-related issue, but then it resulted into multiple shocks, including socioeconomic ones, and of course we are still dealing with many of the aftermaths. I'm not, of course, excluding the psychosocial part, which I think left really a big scar. On the education system, and here I'm also talking a bit as a former school teacher, it's, schools really still haven't recovered from that. But that's part of the city resilience work that we are doing. We have teamed up really closely with WHO, and WHO, in fact, is really also stepping up its city, urban health or city-related health work, which I think is good news because really it adds up to the multi-stakeholder and multi-dimensional perspective that obviously that we are promoting. We have a city resilient global program, which is based in Barcelona. It's been there for over 10 years now. It has reached close to 140 cities in 27 countries, if I'm not mistaken. So, trying to really apply the methodology which was originally developed together with Barcelona, and I'm sure you are familiar with the specific situation of Barcelona, which is located between the mountains and the sea. So somehow it had to, of course, face those challenges years before we started calling it resilience. But indeed, in practical terms, it had to grapple with the shocks and the challenges. And we are very grateful for Barcelona's role and support in that context. We would like to scale up that work. That's an ongoing conversation that we are having, making sure that through partnerships and through involving other actors in the work, that we are able to do more. We can see increased attention and interest from the mayors in particular through different platforms through which we engage mayors. Last year in Geneva, when colleagues organized the Mayors Forum, I was part of a very unique discussion of 3 heads of UN agencies that was happening with the mayors. And the 3 heads of UN agencies were Dr. Tedros, the Director General of WHO, Filippo Grandi, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, and myself. And of course, for us as UN Habitat, to engage with mayors is our daily bread. But for them, for WHO, for UNHCR, it was slightly something unusual. We had to do some work, explaining to them, like, okay, there is nothing that you have to worry about, and they are used to it, and they are usually very helpful and very constructive and all that. And I was super happy about the discussion, and they were surprised in the most positive way about the nature of the interactions that they got, and yet. For them to deliver on health issues and on refugees or on migration-related issues is extremely important. They cannot do it without the local level, without the mayors. And as you can imagine, High Commissioner for Refugees was discussing with them a lot about the housing solutions that they need on the local level, on the municipal level. And for me, it was like, yes. We of course we promote the housing crisis challenge and of course bigger attention to housing within the UN system, and of course we see that the traction is indeed coming up. A few elements to share at the beginning. Thank
Excellent.
you.
So the passion is strong. Yes. And we started with roofs, and then we went to housing. Let's talk about cities. Simone, did you want to share your slides? Yes, excellent. And same question. I know you have also a real passion for climate justice.
Clicker.
Yes.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, all of you, for the opportunity to share with you today. It's a real privilege to be part of this esteemed panel and to be part of this community. And I'd like to approach the question of resiliency with a justice and equity frame of reference in cities. And I'd like to share with you all some of the work that we're doing at the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance to support cities in promoting and advancing equity and justice through climate action and building resiliency through climate justice. And I'd like to bring some very actionable examples of how cities are working in this way. And to do that, I'll give a little bit of background on who we are. We are a global alliance of cities leading the charge towards carbon neutrality, cities that have incredibly ambitious targets trying to get to carbon neutral by 2025, 2030, 2035, and beyond that to carbon negative and climate positive. So very much focused on the challenge and the crises at hand. We work primarily with climate officers, directors of climate, environment, sustainability in those cities and their teams, the people who are mostly and primarily responsible for developing climate policy and implementing that policy. And we do a number of things with our members and non-member cities as well. We create opportunities for peer learning and sharing. We spur innovative projects and actions through innovation funding. We create and build capacity through trainings, workshops, and other types of moments collectively. And we also build capacity in cities, build skills, whether in transformational leadership, whether in communications and engagement, and particularly in how to center justice and equity in climate action. Many of our cities, I just already mentioned, are leading towards carbon neutrality, but it's many of those same cities that are also leading in terms of adaptation. And for years, resiliency, I think, has been more closely associated with the adaptation side or front of climate action. But I think as over the years, climate mitigation and adaptation have become more and more intertwined, there have emerged many more opportunities to build resiliency, to advance justice through combined mitigation and adaptation measures. So I'd like to share a little bit about our approach. Our approach to supporting cities to build capacity and skills in climate justice is based on principles of reparative and restorative justice, on redressing the burdens and the disproportionate burdens and benefits of the fossil fuel economy, recognizing that elements of our communities, important, huge components of our communities, whether in the global south, but also in the global north, very importantly, are generally excluded from the benefits and bear disproportionately the burdens of our fossil fuel economy. Our approach is very place-based, so meeting cities where they are, helping them to understand better their local context, so creating opportunities for cities to deepen their relationships with local community, specifically priority communities that we tend to define as historically marginalized, low income, BIPOC, indigenous communities of color, immigrant refugee communities who are generally not a part of climate planning processes, climate action processes, and are generally the recipients of climate action and climate planning processes. We work with cities to specifically help them design and implement practices to share and build power with priority communities, and that requires a mind shift. It's a systems-based approach, and it requires a real shift in thinking about how we approach climate planning and climate action. And many of our climate officers, even in leading cities, don't represent the lived experience of priority communities. They don't come from those communities. They have not experienced life in the way that those communities generally do. And so we have to build capacity in our officers, in our cities, to better connect, better build relationships, stronger relationships with priority communities in their cities. And so that's what we work on doing primarily, is developing processes and power shifting, power building processes. And that, in the end, in many ways, is what resiliency, how I would define resiliency, is almost analogous with climate justice. It's this process, this approach helps cities think differently about how to build resiliency and about how to build resiliency in communities. And so I'd like to share with you now some practical examples of what that looks like from different sort of geographies, but also different spheres of climate action. Oops, I've gone too far. So this is an example. I'd like to show an example from the city of Sydney in Australia, a city that has very ambitious climate targets and is charting new pathways. And we amplify, we support our members in doing so. We amplify the learnings and hope that other cities will be able to follow suit. But many of our cities have targets that are related to Scope 1 and 2 emissions. They're not necessarily 100% reduction targets either. They may be 70% by 2030. They may be 80% by 2030. There's a certain amount of residual emissions that are present in these climate targets and ambitions. And while offsetting is not the ideal solution by any scenario, because we'd like to get to carbon neutrality as quickly as possible, it is a reality. And some cities are are actually compelled to invest in offsets for the residual emissions that they're not abating. And I'd like to share an example of a project we supported in the city of Sydney, where they have a history of purchasing offsets for residual emissions and have over years evolved that strategy. It started with far-off purchases, very far off and away in faraway lands, on unregulated kind of carbon markets, and that's been evolving. They've been sort of raked over the coals over the years of sort of whether or not these are genuine offsets and so forth, and have improved and evolved their approach to land now, more recently in the recent years, on supporting indigenous-led initiatives for essentially carbon farming, carbon sequestration, managing country and lands, leveraging local knowledge, indigenous aboriginal knowledge, creating economic opportunity, preserving and conserving and valorizing histories and traditions and local knowledge to manage country in such a way that carbon remains stored in the savanna rather than being released into the atmosphere through wildfires, to very severe and intense wildfires later in the season. And they've been doing that in partnership with local indigenous communities, Aboriginal communities. In particular, we supported their work with the Aboriginal Carbon Foundation to find ways to do this closer to home in their New South Wales region, to find community partners that are indigenous-led, that are Aboriginal communities, property owners, managers, stewards, and do that work closely within their bioregion to really localize this kind of resilience. So it's building resilience in the landscape, it's building resilience to climate, it's building resilience in communities, and it's creating many, many benefits beyond climate. A second example I'd like to share, again, is about shifting power, building power in communities. The city of Melbourne, it's just by chance that we're still in Australia, but we supported a project in the city of Melbourne that was oriented towards helping the city understand how to better share and build power with communities. And so they developed a process and a guide to do so, to align their climate work in a way that allows them to essentially put the lived experience of local communities first. And in this case, they ran a series of workshops in the Kensington neighborhood where they essentially allowed community organizations to frame the climate challenge, the climate imperative. And in this case, what emerged was that the climate imperative in Kensington was around food and access to healthy food and viable food. And this became about because of wildfires challenging the food production process, because of COVID-related transportation, because of inflation and so forth. And they developed through a process of essentially stepping aside. The city stepped us out of the way of the climate planning process, and community-led organizations determined, framed the problem, and then implemented a food access project that essentially allowed local communities to produce food, to aggregate food that was donated, and to create a very dignified way for people to access, people who had food access challenges to access food in their local neighborhood. And the important lesson, it reduced carbon emissions, but the very important lesson that the city learned was how to move away from the process, how to allow communities to lead the way. And we just heard in the workshop downstairs challenges where local community organizations have a hard time working with cities because of the bureaucracy, because of the administrative processes, et cetera. And that was something that was spearheaded here, was really the city of Melbourne came out of this process sort of understanding better how they obstruct genuine partnership with local communities. I have a couple of examples, but I see you looking at me, Jennifer, as if, we want to move on. Yep.
We are not sure. We'll keep it moving. No, but thank you, Simone. Thank you for sharing examples from cities and also about food. I mean, this is such a complex topic. It's so high in the sky, and food is so anchoring. So thank you for that example as well. We know Sheela. We know she likes to mix things up. So she has asked, actually, now she would like to share a few slides. So we will actually jump over to that, if that's all right. And then, of course, brief, and we will all receive all the slides, so we can definitely continue the conversation. We have so many wonderful people in the room, so we'll do a little more dialogue, and then we'll open it up.
The reason the reason I said that I would change my mind is I think many of you have to also support and assist initiatives like this that facilitate large volumes of very poor people to take on research, action, and politicizing their process. So, oh, what did I do? So the first thing I want to say is that there's a history of creating large social movements of people. Yeah. So this is I can't sit and talk. Sorry. So this is to say that in every city that you go, you will see large informal settlements that are like townships and that are often larger than many of your European towns. And therefore, it's a big challenge to work with this volume. And in the last 40 years, in my journey, I've been privileged to be part of creating arrangements by which these communities become federated and they work together with other networks in their city, but also across cities. Next, I think better. So we have this thing which we call the federation model, where we produce identity. In most cities, even the informal settlements are not mapped on the disaster plans. They are the first people on dealing with the crisis, but they often don't know who they should get in touch with in the municipality. So we create systems for them. We produce evidence and aggregated data to challenge the absence and the invisibility that people face. And in all these things, we feel it's possible because women are at the center of it. So in our slum parlance, we say the men are 100-meter dashers, the women are the marathon runners. Because women want to do things for their family, for their neighborhood, and they're ready to wait for a long time. And therefore, what we do is we start with what communities can do themselves, and then go to the state or the city for what they cannot do themselves. Next. And so we have lots of stories about how we do it, but the first time we aggregated outside India was in an Asian network called the Asian Coalition of Housing Rights. And we had 19 countries in which activists like me who were working to fight evictions got together and then began to negotiate with municipalities and other organizations. The idea was, how do we co-produce solutions with our cities, and what can we do to make our city officials feel compelled to work with us? So it wasn't always just doing what we needed to do, but how we could address the city's challenges that they could not solve. And when I talk to all of you, I'll tell you all those stories. Next. And then in 1992, a whole lot of us who are housing activists were invited to South Africa to meet Joe Slovo, who remains one of our heroes in the apartheid process. And he called us all from all over the world to say, South Africa needs to learn what not to do. So when he was there, he learned from all of us what not to do, but then subsequently they learned from the developers and the contractors what to do, which is all wrong. And so we then moved to Africa, and out of that came the Slum Dwellers International. Its main registered office is in Cape Town. And the whole idea of this networking is to produce an identity that is universal and that is not located in one town, one city, one location. And so communities know how to collect data about themselves. They know how to produce maps about their neighborhoods that are more accurate than anybody else's, and challenge the state on this information. We are also a founder member of Cities Alliance when it was formed after the World Urban Forum. Next. So we got involved in the addressing of climate based on the reality that the lives of poor people had changed dramatically. And yet we didn't know how to define it. we knew how to define our engagement in development, but we didn't know what to do in climate. And wherever we went in the climate space, nobody talked about the poor as a separate, specific group of first, second, third generation migrants that were dealing and living in the most vulnerable locations. And therefore, my education began when I was invited to represent these at a task force that Ban Ki-moon had set up with Mary Robinson to look at what to do with the social justice angle. And that's my journey began then. Next. And so one of the things we try to do is to explore ways by which we bring into what women want to do the elements of climate science and technology so that they understand the logic of why the world is changing. Next. And so during COVID, we got two amazing gifts. One, we all learned to talk on the web. And now women have decided that Zoom is the smartest one of them all because all of us could access it. And we decided these were the 5 things. You were talking about food. So roof over our heads was first. Food was next, because in COVID, everybody just ate carbs and fell ill. Poor people just got white starch to eat. So we developed a campaign which said, take 35% of any edible green thing in your garden, cook it with that and eat it, because you didn't have any other choice. The third one was called Wages and Wheels. No city plans to incorporate informal settlements in their strategy for transport. So poor people spend 1/3 of their wages on getting to a transport hub and getting there. So we're now going after everybody who's doing transport and saying, these are the slums in your city. Now show us how the connection comes. And we are part of a network called Agility that works on this, who are training us what to do. And we are working in about 8 countries to develop this in cities. And then health, safety, and the last one was in disasters. Everybody treats poor people like soup kitchen holders, there's a flood, you have a soup kitchen, some people come, feed you, and then they run away. And then you're still sitting over there saying, what to do with my house? So we're saying that the disaster management must include the protocols for poor people. Next. And so then we came to this concept that homes are like this, and they are built incrementally, and they are built with whatever they can. Just next. And so this is the study that we are doing. This thing on the top is what every household has as benchmark startup of data. We look at ways by which, in the money that they can afford, we bring better materials, better designs, better construction methods, and access to finance if they can afford to take a loan from outside. And this kind of stuff will be done in those 100 labs. Every lab will bring its own dimension of differences, but the spine of the data will remain like this. So we will produce this aggregated data out of 100 labs in these 4 regions to bring to professionals, to bring to policymakers what needs to be done. So just so that you know that it's not a flaky raving and ranting process, and that we really are challenging professionals to acknowledge the right to research that poor people should be given, and how investments of this. And if any of you can raise money for me, this project costs $10 million, of which the first $1 million I have already got. Thank you.
Excellent. I've been a fan of yours for so long, and I feel extremely privileged to be sitting here with you and to hear these stories. I just wanted to pick up on one thing that you said and repeated several times: identity. Identity, how the connection, how do we feel mobilized as individuals and as communities? And I also really like, you didn't touch on this one as much, but I wrote it down because I really like the framing. We are warriors. not victims. And that is, as Lauren said yesterday, that's flipping the script of how we see this narrative, how we see this discussion, and who owns it. So thank you so much. Dear colleagues, I'm going to ask, I think, one more question, because there's a lot of passion, a lot of stories here, so we're taking our time. And then I think I'm going to open it to the room, because I know there's a lot of you who probably have questions, ideas, money for our wonderful colleagues. So I will maybe jump actually around a little. And I worked hard on these questions, so I'm a little sad I don't get to go through them all, but I think you already answered everything along the way, so that's fine. But I wanted to go with perhaps a little reflection. So let's talk about what you're doing and your passion and your roles, but in context to what we have had here. So I'm going to add a little reflection on my end, and then I'd like to hand it over to you. And maybe where do you want to go after this? Because this is a few days of our life, but it can be instrumental in how we decide to go forward. So I will read what I wrote this morning after a 3:30 in the morning whiskey experience. So, the last few days, we have discussed themes including the importance of data reporting, indicators, and the role of digital tools. We've heard about the concept of empathetic cities, ownership versus relationship as a new theory of property, and explored how to scale micro investments. And now, we've talked about the importance of connection, of storytelling and narratives, of which we've heard quite a few already, and been called out to flip the script to accelerate action and implementation in our cities, our communities, and ourselves. We've blamed Canada and Copenhagen while lifting their efforts and learnings, and have been asked to talk about our own failures and successes in the field. We've had conversations with each other, practiced good trouble, of which I think we have the best expert here, and been awestruck by the Alps while talking about cities. I'll share a few quotes I've found inspiring, and these are just conversations with some of you. A good city is a collection of passion projects, and that's Harold. Or cities are spaces of love and laughter. These are a few of my initial reflections, but I want to hear from you, from your personal or professional experience, or maybe a mix of the two. What are some of your take-home messages from the forum that you can feed into this topic of equitable urban resilience?
I think every presentation that I have heard has blown my brain, because it's it's juxtaposing what I'm doing or what we are doing in a very different angle and a different perspective. And I said to some people, now we see so many cows, I feel like a cow who's chewed a lot of cud, but I have to digest it, because this is like an explosion of meeting people that I've never talked to. So I've made a list of all of you who I will drag into my world. Starting from finding which trees. Women want to grow trees, but they have very clear criteria of what they want. We don't know anything about trees. So how are we going to do that? When very, very, what I call climate warriors come to slum dwellers and they say, how are you going to reduce the carbon footprint? I'm going to show them your thing, saying, you do it. Don't make me do it. But things like that, you get lots of arguments, you get lots of perspectives. You're talking about data. We want to put all our data on a platform. We are always getting messed up with people who tell us, it's like, give me your data. And then after some time they say, oh, the funding for managing your data is over. Now you take it back. We don't know how to take it back. So that data is gone. So now we are looking, so today morning when we were discussing, that's why I sat in the data thing to say, now what are the questions I need to ask? people. How do I get a surety? Do I do it myself? Do I share it? What do I do? So I'm just saying that every single session, and of course all the personal discussions, I'm just looking at how I will use that. There are a lot of people who teach. I'm going after them. And what we are trying to do is to put all this stuff into student curriculum. So one of the things we announced as I was coming here was a global challenge to young students who are in university, undergraduates, who have to look at all our work and give us ideas. And the women are the first. Before we give it to the expert jury, our women are going to decide whether they're good ideas or not. So we'll also tell you all what happened there. But I think that the whole idea for me of this group is to get out of your own comfort zone of what you know and explore what you don't know. I mean, this work on futures is just blown. How do you do that? I'm going to catch her and make you do that. So I'm just saying that it's a real privilege to come and meet people you don't know and leave as friends.
Leaving as friends. That is fantastic. Yes, that's an applause.
10 minutes for quick fire round questions.
Perfect. So let's keep that passion and keep it a little quicker. Wrap up, and then we'll open it to the room.
Does it work? Yeah. Sorry about that. Well, let me start by saying that our future is urban. You are all familiar with the statistics. In 1950, it was 30% urban and 70% rural. In 2050, it will be exactly the opposite. And what does it mean for us? How are we going to deal with that? We see what's happening. We see the slum challenge. We have what at UN Habitat we don't hesitate to call the global housing crisis. We have the climate crisis. And of course, resilience is an important aspect of the same work, because resilience is needed. The resilience work is needed for us to better address the crisis situations in different contexts. And this is the message that we as UN Habitat are also bringing to the Summit of the Future. You are aware that New York in September we will be having the Summit of the Future. The outcome document that the member states in New York are working on will be called Pact for the Future, and it will have two annexes: one, the Global Digital Compact, and the other one, Declaration for Future Generations. And of course, urban absolutely has to be there. No, so of course we are working hard on the same. Focusing on urban, but also on the important role played by local and regional governments, by localization of SDGs, for the Global Digital Compact, bringing forward the issue of people-centered smart cities as an important accelerator of the same. And then Declaration of Future Generations cannot be complete without the concept of urban youth. And of course, if I had more time, I would be able to share with you about the youth work that we are prioritizing in places like Colombia and the slums of Kenya. Recently, after the floods that happened, it was the youth that really we were able to reach out to again and address some of the situations that were happening. And of course, the big question is, as Sheela has already talked about better than I, is how to incorporate the slum situation into the urban planning. And this is at the core, obviously, of the work that we do. When I was leaving New York as a diplomat after 11 years, there were colleagues who were asking me why I was going to Nairobi, and if it was a conscious decision that I was going to UN Habitat and to Nairobi, because as you know, UN Habitat is not necessarily one of the biggest agencies. It's not UNDP, it's not WHO or anything like that. Well, my answer was, yes, it's small, but beautiful. And I like the beautiful stuff, and of course I like the challenge that it comes with, that you need to build up yeah, it's a bit luxurious maybe to be UNDP and to be used to doing your work the usual way. Well, my friends, there is no more business as usual, and I'm sure you are not surprised by hearing that. And many of us are confronted with the same thing, whether it's UNDP or UNICEF or other important components of the UN system. Let me wrap up by also mentioning that next year in September there will be another summit, the last of the three Antonio Guterres summits towards the end of his second term, and it will be the World Social Summit. And of course, we are bringing to the World Social Summit very forcefully the issue of adequate housing, because we believe that no social policy can be complete without addressing housing. It is at the core of any social policy. And if you are able to address the housing situation, then you open up the floodgate, so to say, for additional issues, access to water, access to sanitation, to energy, but also access to health, to education. Without housing, this is all somehow just kind of floating. So we certainly would like to join forces with you also in that context, because there needs to be an important push for that towards the summit of the future, as I have already mentioned, which is very advanced now, and for next year towards the World Social Summit, where the issue of adequate housing really needs to feature. And we see increased level of interest, increased level of attention, and platforms that enable us to move ahead. So just a few perspectives from our side. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Michal. Housing, very, very crucial, and it's a good thing we have so many architects in the room as well. Now, Simone, take us home on this. Now, we are all forum newbies. I believe you're a veteran, right? Have you been here before? Or you're also a newbie? All right. So reflections from the forum and also a quick wrap up so that we stay on time for lunch and maybe have a question. We'll see how ambitious we are with that.
Thank you. I'll try to be very succinct. I was thinking back to Indy's opening yesterday and the massive challenge and urgency that's upon us. And one phrase struck me in particular. I think he emphasized the need for a massive amount of micro actions. And I've been thinking about what that really means and how do you achieve a massive amount of micro actions that at a scale that we've never seen before. And I like to think that it's very much aligned with what I was suggesting is our approach to advancing climate justice and equity. And that is the only way we can really get to massive micro action is if communities and people are taking action themselves and leading action themselves. And that's why I think it's so fundamentally important that we frame climate action in this way and in such a way that advances equity and justice and puts the power, the agency, and the voice where it can be most effective. And so I just want to leave with one concluding thought around that I think fundamentally that's a governance issue. That's a governance issue around how we make policy, how we frame policy, and who is in the room and who is framing the challenge.
Thank you. Power to the people. Yeah. I'm going to just refer to that again. Massive amounts of micro actions. Definitely a take-home message for myself as well. So thank you for lifting that. I see we have 3 minutes.
2 or 3 minutes, 2 or 3 big questions.
Yes. In fact, I'm actually going to suggest, since we have a great panel, but they're passionate about this. So maybe we can have a reflection or two from what they've said, just from your side, or a question, please, Martin. Yes. Yeah, excellent.
Sorry, I'm hidden in the corner here. Hello. The question I wanted to ask goes back, of course, I'm the data wonk here in the group, with the Summit of the Future coming up and also the negotiations of the Digital Global Compact, I am familiar with some initiatives to consider the declaration of an international decade for data, using the framework of the international decades to actually frame these topics in a way that is more holistic and also perceived by the different silos as something to work on. Because as we know, the SDGs are not covering that. Is that something that's still on the radar? And if so, how can we be part of it?
Anyone else? Any thoughts, final comments, thoughts? How does your work fit into this topic as well? They've blown your brains. In fact, Sheila's brain has been blown. I think mine as well. We know lunch is coming, so maybe Michal, do you want to respond to that quickly, or?
Thanks. Okay. Yes. Thanks very much for that question. Indeed, data has been an absolutely crucial part of of the digital agenda, and especially for the SDGs. SDG 11 has suffered, as you are well aware, in particular of the data gaps and challenges around that. We have actually, as UN Habitat, we have recently created a data coalition with the World Bank and with the OECD to elevate the attention to the data question, and of course to team up to address some of the key issues. Actually, yesterday I had to step out of one of the sessions, and the UN Statistical Commission had a session on housing data. I was providing some opening remarks to that, which is important. So we are bringing the statisticians from all the 193 member states, and trying to raise the awareness about that. But back to the question. Indeed, that was initiated as a sub-item, or whatever we should call it, in relation to the Global Digital Compact. The way I understand it at this point is that there will be a reference to the data issue with the Global Digital Compact, with the idea that then the UN Secretariat will be tasked to develop this further and come back to it through the regular channels. So hopefully there will be a hook, as we call it, in the Global Digital Compact, which we can then build on, and it would be good to have a further conversation about how to use that hook and together with other UN entities develop it into something tangible.
Excellent. And lunch is a great place to have those conversations. Any other final comments, thoughts, excitement? No? Okay, then maybe I will wrap it up just to say one thing. Our motto at WWF is Together Possible. And I think hearing these inspirational stories, your personal convictions, your professional work, thank you so much for everything that you're doing and for sharing it with this fantastic community.